Welcome to the March 1st edition of the PFF Forecast. Brad Spielberger, live from the greatest city in the world, at least during this week. Indianapolis, live at the Combine is Brad Spielberger, and we are going to hit a few different things. We're going to talk draft props, specifically Combine props, and some of the stuff about Jalen Carter, what that means for the number one overall pick props. So a little update on that. Brad is going to give us the intel on what he's heard. Some stuff's got to stay off the record, but I'm going to get as much out of him as I can. It'll be a great podcast. Let's rock. All right, Brad, I was expecting you to at least be live from St. Elmo's. This appears to be a hotel room. What happened? I thought we had the entire bottom downstairs of St. Elmo's reserved just for this podcast.
I should go over there, get some shrimp cocktail, a nice steak, and just do the podcast.
That'd be ideal. I do think that perhaps getting some information, maybe trying to get someone on the podcast during the legendary PFF party downstairs at St. Elmo's would be a great episode. But let's start here. So you've been there now for a couple of days. I think the biggest story to come out seems to be the Jalen Carter stuff from today. For anyone that's kind of been living under a rock, can you give us a little bit of a recap and like what might come next?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously we are going to talk about the draft implications and all those things, but of course, first and foremost, a terrible, terrible situation. Two young people passing away in this situation. So essentially what happened was, if you hadn't heard about this story, a couple of weeks ago, it came out that a Georgia player and a grad assistant had passed away in a car crash, believed at the time to be a single car accident, no really kind of implication of anything else. It now looks like the belief is, and I don't want to misspeak, but essentially that Jalen Carter is believed to have been racing against this car, and then obviously left that scene, and now the belief is based from the Athens, Georgia Police Department that he was involved in some capacity. So it was very weird. So there's these podiums that happen every year where a bunch of players come in, they talk to us about 10-15 minutes, you fire off questions. He was scheduled to do either 10 or 10:30, I forget. And of course, everyone's wants to go see his, going to be a top 5 pick, all those things. And all of a sudden, it's like 10:15, and they're never late. They're always very on time. They're very, regimented with it. And we're sitting there, we're like, what's going on? And you look at your phone, and we see the tweet, and also I thought it was interesting. No scoopage here. It came the scoop was from the police department. They put this out. And then comes out that he basically flew home last night to go address these charges. Charged right now with 2 misdemeanors. One for racing is the name of the charge. The other one, I forget the charge. I don't want to say. But anyway, so obviously massive implications here. It did not do the podium, of course, and all those things. And so, yeah, and then here we are.
Wow. So obviously, like, terrible from a human perspective, and from a kind of draft perspective for a lot of teams is sort of a nightmare scenario as well. I mean, obviously Jalen Carter was a really good player on the field, and this, creates some issues that might prevent him from being picked. Let's see what the betting markets have reacted here. So FanDuel, Carter was, I believe, was it 6-1?
It was at 9 early this week. It went from 6 to 9 this week. Yep.
It went from 6 to 9 this week. It was 450, went to 6, went to 9 to 1. It is now 26-1. I'm actually surprised, Brad, that he's even still on here, to be honest with you.
I don't think he should be. There's no reason for him at this point, in my opinion.
Right? Like, I can't imagine that this is kind of turning around here. So let's take a look at what those number one overall odds are right now. Bryce Young, -170. CJ Stroud, +350. Anthony Richardson, +750. He has moved pretty dramatically up. Will Levis, 9-1. Will Anderson, 11-1. Jalen Carter, 26-1. Tyree Wilson is 50-1. So what do you kind of make of this? Because there's two components, right? The first is the number one overall pick has been rumored. Your Bears are probably going to trade it. So, we had kind of thought maybe Carter was the guy. If they were going to stay up there, they were going to take Carter. From that perspective, does this change anything with respect to, the Bears or maybe even the Cardinals? And then there's also the, okay, if you do, who is that second defensive player? Who's that first defensive player off the board? Because it was kind of a toss up, between Anderson and Wilson to be number two. And now one of those guys can be number one.
Yeah, so I think it has massive effects on both the Chicago Bears and Arizona Cardinals. For Chicago, I think now, look, they still would like to trade down, but I would imagine only to two, right? You go to two with Houston, which you're not going to get a ton of value, because they know you don't want to go to four anymore. I think, before this, it was, hey, we'll go to four with the understanding of, all right, first overall pick quarterback, second overall pick quarterback, and then Arizona will either take one of these guys, maybe they trade out as well, which I'll get to, and then we'll take the one of Anderson or Carter. Now, I would imagine their thought process is, and by the way, these podiums are very boring, very cliche. Will Anderson's was the best I've ever seen. I've been here 3 years now, 4 years now. He was giving awesome answers, talking ball, but also just being a normal dude, just a very cool guy. I think he impressed today, and I'm sure he's doing very well in interviews. But now I think so. The first knockdown effect is the Bears probably maybe don't want to go. Maybe they don't even trade at all. And then secondly, if you're Arizona, let's say hypothetically, Bryce Young at one, Will Anderson to the Bears at two. You're sitting there at three, and you no longer want to take Jalen Carter. Now I think if you're Las Vegas at seven, if you're Atlanta at eight, if you're the Panthers at nine, if you're Tennessee at 11, and Arizona no longer thinks, okay, there's a blue chip, really, really good player, that now I think becomes a way more likely trade spot at number three.
So what's interesting here is the Tyree Wilson smoke, there's probably more to it because I did see a picture of his wingspan, which is really impressive. The dude is a monster. But remember, Daniel Jeremiah had Wilson going ahead of Will Anderson. Do you think this is a situation where the Bears view the difference between Anderson and Wilson more so than maybe the Cardinals would, right? We've talked about this kind of how do GMs draft? What sorts of things are they looking for? Anderson appears to be more of the, production over traits kind of situation, although it's weird to not say that he doesn't have like great traits. But, so is that something like, how do you view Wilson here? Has he fallen back? Has Anderson moved ahead just because of his his ability to converse at the podium?
What's actually interesting is that if you go look at Matt Eberflus coach defensive ends, I mean, guys that he was a part of drafting, Kwity Paye from Michigan, first round pick, and then Dio Odingbo from Vanderbilt, second round pick. Those guys are like 6'4", 6'5", 265, 275 pounds. Will Anderson is currently listed as 243 pounds. So Tyree Wilson, actually, I think you would make the argument, is the better quote unquote fit from a measurable standpoint in what Matt Eberflus historically has liked to do. But I do think with Anderson, I think there is a special talent there. I mean, he played like 4-eye. He was moved around the Alabama defensive line, and I think he has the play strength to hold up. But I actually would argue, if you're just looking at how does this guy fit what this coach likes to do, Wilson actually would be the player that answers that question.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. And you look at, so Ryan Pace doesn't have a lot of, drafting, I guess, experience here that you can rely on because
Ryan Poles, don't trigger me. Ryan Poles.
Sorry. Ryan Poles. I don't know how I made that connection, but anyways, yeah, that was weird. I'm usually better than that. But anyways, Ryan Poles doesn't have a ton of, actually like kind of pulling the trigger experience, right? I mean, that was mostly, people ahead of him in Kansas City, right? So with Brett Veach and, Andy Reid. So do we have anything to kind of go on with Pace? Do you think Eberflus is making the call here? Because I would agree with you. You look at like Khalil Mack, for example, the physical specimen and beast of a man, that was obviously a different, group there in Chicago. That's probably why I thought of Pace. But you just think about Chicago, you think about kind of a massive, a guy that can handle the elements, so to speak. What insight might you bring with Poles coming over from Kansas City?
Yeah, so I think he's shown, a willingness to wheel and deal. I mean, he traded down 4 times in last year's draft. Obviously, during this season, he traded away Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn. So I think he is a guy that's a mover and shaker. I do think Matt Eberflus is very involved. I've probably said this on the show before, but I don't think fans realize how much head coaches do dictate personnel moves. But I think Poles also, he's a former player, so he's, truly, yes, he's a personnel guy, but I think he also speaks that language. He's not like a whatever. He doesn't have a different path that gets there that has a coach pushing him around even more. But yeah, I mean, I do think this shakes up their entire approach. I think it makes them go back to the drawing board and have to basically start at square one, potentially. But I think he is a guy that is a, buy on traits. Like, is this guy a guy that we can mold into a player? Let's, production matters, yes, but projecting a guy out once we get our hands on him, all those cliches, can we form him into a really good player? I think that's how Kansas City, I think, views it, and I think he has that, line of thought as well.
Yeah, by the way, you want to know everything that you can about these players, how they've performed in college, how we project them forward into the NFL. The one place that you need to go is pff.com. The new 2023 NFL Draft Guide is live. It is fantastic. It is the best that we've ever had, and it's only getting better. There are updates coming throughout the draft season. You get, alignment, how frequently players played at different alignments for O-line and D-line, plus all the advanced data around how well players have performed. And you also get access to the big board. So you look at our big board, we have Will Anderson at 3. Obviously, we haven't updated it yet with Jalen Carter. I'm sure he will get moved down here. But we have Tyree Wilson at 7. Tyree Wilson has never had a PFF grade in the past 3 years above 75.1. That was what he had last year. So from a production standpoint, Will Anderson, who's had grades in the 80s each of the last 2 years, including almost 90 the year before, this past one has been elite from a production perspective. But I do think there's some value there, and potentially when the kind of team player combos come out in the draft props, that would be one to look at. What do you think about Indy? So is Indy not trading up? Is that like off the table now, or are they just waiting? What does that look like?
Yeah, so let's say the hypothetical I had before plays out where Chicago doesn't want to go that far anymore. I still think they maybe have to go to 3 just to prevent these other teams behind them from jumping to 3. I will say this before, let's say that's not the case and Chicago is still comfortable going down. In my opinion, the value is betting every other quarterback besides Bryce Young. Like, I think he's going to be the pick, but I think minus 160 is a bit of a stretch. And a guy like, I have Levis at 10-1. I mentioned that a couple weeks ago, back now to 9-1. Anthony Richardson has probably been too steamed that I would wait for a couple weeks before you go back to that market. But anyway, I think that's the thing now. They maybe have to move at one spot themselves to prevent the other teams from jumping ahead of them. Look, they have to go quarterback. Like, they're trying to pretend like, oh, we might go better, we might do this. They're drafting a quarterback in this class.
Okay, that I think is, like, if they don't, I mean, the only thing I could see from an Indy perspective is, look, we're at 4. It's going to cost us. We just wait for next year, like pull the trifecta in terms of generational talents that they drafted with Caleb Williams, Andrew Luck, and Peyton Manning. But I think that does make sense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more broadly now. What are some of the narratives? What are the things that you're hearing that you think you can trust from what people are talking about at the combine? And just for people who, if you haven't been to the combine, which, there's no real reason to ever go to Indianapolis, but if you are going to go to Indianapolis, this is probably the reason to go. You go to a bar. Prime is the bar. It's a steakhouse. It turns into a bar at night. And I mean, you can just go up to a GM and I mean, you could talk to them. Now, they might not talk back to you, but the point is, it's a place where people feel relatively safe talking about things. A lot of deals get done here, a lot of negotiations. You see agents, obviously, from a free agency perspective. So there's a lot that goes on there. So it is a great place to learn things. You do have to be able to sift through the BS. I think you are a pretty good BS sifter. What insights rise to the top?
Yeah, I like to think so. I think the big thing we were looking at, and we're waiting for more markets to put these things out, but obviously testing starts tomorrow. I guess when you're listening to this, starts today on Thursday. And there are some props out on Prize Picks right now, which is an app where you can only do parlays. You can't bet on single things. But we are hoping and expecting for books to put out, these props on over-unders for different testing. I'm sure 40 will be the biggest market by far, the 40-yard dash. The over on Gordon McGinnis at 6.5 seconds did cash today in the combine experience. That's a whole separate conversation. But there are 4 guys that I of course, Mike Renner and Trevor Sikkema are in-house draft guys. I asked their opinion, but then I also throw that around to a couple other people in the draft space and their thoughts on a couple of these over-unders. So the couple that jump out, Miles Murphy, the Clemson edge rusher, a 4.55 that everyone said the over there is a good play. Brian Breesy, also from Clemson, their interior guy. I mean, a guy who's like 300 plus pounds, and his 40 is listed at 4.77. For that one, I think Trevor Sycamore went into our database, basically said, if a guy weighs this much and runs this fast, what percentile would that be? Because we have that information. That would be a 98th percentile 40-yard dash for him. So, and he's coming off an injury to end his season at Clemson. So those two jumped out to them. Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback from Penn State. It's listed at 4.45. Very good player, but a taller corner, a big, I want to say 6'2", 6'3" guy. They thought the over was also a play there. And one more, Broderick Jones, the tackle from, I want to say, Georgia. Georgia or Ohio State, a powerhouse tackle. He's listed at 4.79. He's a guy who's like 325, 330. Again, I think it would be a 90 plus percentile 40-yard dash. So if those four names come out in that range on a actual sports book where you don't have to parlay, if you have prize picks, go ahead, and maybe, make some plays on those. But those were consensus. I talked to 4 or 5 people at least on each of those, and it was a consensus. Those numbers are a bit too low.
Okay. Well, what I like about that is continuing to bet overs. But in this case, overs are more like unders generally are.
Yes.
I think everyone likes to take, wants people to be fast. I think the difference here is people just don't know much about anything for a lot of these guys. And you can get a lot of insight just from having watched the film. I think that's where, that's where Trevor and Mike really know, because they watch these guys play a ton. So those all make sense. The Joey Porter one, I think, is the one that probably sticks out to me the most. And that's super fast. And you could see people just liking his name and betting under, which I think is a good one. So those all make a ton of sense. By the way, go check out the PFF Printing Press Discord, which is where, if there are any updates to this or are there any more that we kind of are hearing or seeing at the Combine, we'll post them there. And you can jump on them. Are these only available at Prize Picks right now? Is that the deal?
As far as I'm aware, only available at Prize Picks. And I think it's a great point you said. These are taking unders effectively in games because everyone just wants to see their favorite player run super fast and thinks every year we're going to get these generational guys. I'll tie this in. Maybe it's not tied to 40-yard dash time, but pretty much every GM, probably not on the record, but essentially saying this is not a good draft class. They don't view it as a great group. Of course, the quarterbacks will define how we look back on in the future. But yeah, it's not really viewed as a special class. So why should we expect a lot of these guys to test out of the building?
Yeah, that makes sense. So those are draft or combine props. What about from a draft prop perspective? Is there anything that, or maybe in free agency, where it seems like people are either just talking about this guy a lot, or most people are positive, right? You probably won't find many people just killing dudes at this point in time. But are there any kind of hot names that are being thrown around that you just keep hearing come up? And what might we make of that?
Yeah, I think one that's interesting. It's probably maybe lost a little bit of value because Daniel Jeremiah put him super high in one of his recent mock drafts. That's Lucas Van Ness, the edge defender from Iowa. Where he's a guy where, again, I got to give credit to our guys. And, Mike and I had this conversation. But again, I talk to those guys and I bug other people I know in the space. But basically, Iowa is so old school where if you're not an upperclassman, not a senior, you don't play. So he didn't play a ton. And then, people just don't think he was viewed properly or played properly, deployed properly, put him out on the edge, let him rush, as a 7 or even a wide 9, probably not a wide 9, but nevertheless, he was put inside. He was not playing a ton. And so they think he's a guy that he's going to test off the charts and a guy that people think is a very, very good football player. That's a big one for sure. Like I said, probably maybe been steamed a little bit at this point. And I would say, too, one more thing that I think there's some value there. I'm not certain Quentin Johnston is the first wide receiver off the board. He is currently the favorite. I would guess the reason he's there is A, TCU made the national championship game, so has a lot of name recognition. And then B, he is the only potential X outside receiver as 6'4", 200 plus pounds, whatever. In my opinion, he doesn't really play that big. He's made some incredible contested catches and stuff like that, but you also on his film see some misses there. I think a guy like a Jordan Addison to be first wide receiver taken is a good bet right now. Can play on the outside, probably will be a slot eventually. But I'm just not sure. I mean, to mention Jeremiah again, he didn't even have him in his first mock draft going in the first round at all. And had multiple receivers ahead of him. So I think that's a good play as well. I want to say he's plus 265 is Jordan Addison, the second favorite, but I think there's some value there.
So you mentioned Van Ness, and I like him a lot. I think it's a bummer that you can't there aren't more widely available markets right now because, thinking about how he's going to test, I think that dude is going to test out of this world. So he's 6'5", 270. And to your point, was just a sophomore last year. And so that lack of, production, he played 478 snaps. Okay. It's 271 of those were pass rush snaps. So that's just not a lot. I mean, you look at, let's compare him to Will Anderson, I guess, if I can ever get there. And Will Anderson played 383 pass rush snaps. So just, a big discrepancy in terms of amount of playing time. But as Mike writes, like, this dude is a freak of nature. And while you look at his film, and again, Mike writes this also in the draft guide, he's kind of a one move guy. But here's the thing: when people see that film, they're gonna forget completely about it when they see how athletic the dude is, and then they go watch him work out and they go, "Oh, he's developed all these other moves, right?" What do you guys think these dudes have been working on the past 3 months? They've just been like, sitting there doing yoga? Like, no, they know, hey, we have one move. That's what people think about us. We're gonna diversify. We're gonna show all that stuff. So I think that one makes a ton of sense. I think you always see this. Guys that are freakishly athletic. Jordan Davis last year. There's only so many of these dudes. If there's one thing that I continuously hear Chris say, and Chris talks to every owner and every GM every single week, that you keep hearing is there's just something about guys that are uniquely athletic that they're going to go higher because you can't find those guys. I think it's why you see corners dropping rather frequently, because it's harder to imagine that you'll see, that you won't see that kind of speed and agility versus the type of like a human, from a size perspective. So I think Van Ness is a guy that makes a ton of sense. Is there a team in your mind that, might be, this is their top 10 and they're going to take him, and it would be a little bit of a surprise?
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously tied to our original conversation as well. It kind of shakes up the entire teams that need defensive line. You look, Seattle is desperate to add more on the edge, so they're picking at 5. I think they make all the sense in the world. I mean, even Detroit at 6. Yes, they just drafted Aiden Hutchinson and Josh Pascal, 2 players I personally loved coming out last year. But they could still continue to add along the defensive line. They've kind of shifted Aiden on the interior sometimes on pass rushing downs, and I think Aaron Glenn is definitely very kind of versatile in how he deploys guys. So those teams, look, Atlanta is desperate for pass rush as well. Ryan Nielsen coming over from New Orleans, I think it would make a little bit more sense. Like historically, I think Atlanta they were using more outside linebackers. I think Nielsen might bring over from New Orleans, but they want those big, defensive end type players. So, is that a fit? Who knows? But yeah, I think he's a guy that will probably sneak into the top 10, and you start looking from 5 to 10, and you can probably find some fits there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You mentioned, teams like Atlanta, for example. We've talked a little bit about Atlanta, and every GM they're not going to say, oh yeah, we don't want this player, we're going to trade him. So if you're not expecting Cincinnati to come out and be like, yeah, T. Higgins, kind of shy. We're kind of looking for people to get rid of him. We don't think we can pay him. Lamar's great, but we think it might be just over with him. Of course, you're not going to hear that. Which of these, kind of, we love this guy, we're going to keep him, do you think has the most kind of weight to him? And which ones do you go, yeah, if they're saying that in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, or when the draft rolls around, we're going to go, remember that quote?
Yeah. This year's the Josh Rosen infamous graphic of Josh is our guy, I think is Kyle Trask. I don't think anyone believes it for a second. Down in Tampa, I mean, he was never the QB2 behind Brady at any point, because Blaine Gabbert, the prodigal Blaine Gabbert was ahead of him in the depth chart the entire time. So I don't think anyone really believes that one. As for the ones that people do believe in, I'll tell you, I think New York is trying really, really, really hard to keep both guys in Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Can they pull it off is a different question, but I actually think that is real, that they would like to have both of those guys back. I don't think it's smoke.
Wow. That is amazing. So the Tampa Bay one, would they look to trade up? Would they look to take a Tanner McKee or a Hendon Hooker? Like, how is it a free agency play? Are they looking at a Derek Carr? Like, where does that because that would really shake things up, right? If they were to go after one of these free agent, options. I mean, maybe say Jimmy G. Like, what do you think makes sense there?
I think they're a team like you mentioned. Maybe in the second round, you look into a Tanner McKee, Hendon Hooker type player. I know Jeremiah mentioned that Hooker could slip into the bottom of the first round. I mean, obviously he's an authority compared to me, but a 25-year-old coming off a torn ACL, I don't know if that's going to happen. But I do think he is a potentially great second round flyer, a guy that would have gone in the first had he not gotten hurt. You bring him in, let him sit for a year or get healthy, and then maybe he does take over. And so then I think they're going to be kind of in that like Baker Mayfield type of market, a kind of a bridge guy to that next player. It would be my guess.
Yeah. McKee, 6'6", 230, pretty pure pocket passer guy. One of the things I like about the draft guide is the player comps. McKee's is Kerry Collins, which I think is interesting. People forget Kerry Collins has had some good years. By the way, Luke Van Ness, Justin Smith, which I think is super interesting. And obviously people who are Niners fans will remember Justin Smith. He was a terror out there. The Lamar Jackson stuff, any development there? I mean, is this a place where you would expect? I mean, it's weird because he doesn't have an agent, right? So like normally you'd expect movement on these types of things over the combine, but his agent ain't there.
No, and that's a huge piece. Like, right. Like, you could assume that 90% of leaks on anything is probably coming from that side of the table. So if you're hearing things about, the negotiation there, I'm not accusing Baltimore of leaking, who knows, but it does kind of change the entire dynamic of it by not having, an agent there. Look, Eric DaCosta, the GM, had his podium today. Not only did he kind of not want to talk about it in general, I kind of find it interesting and weird. They keep saying they like kind of refuse to acknowledge which tag they're going to use, the non-exclusive or the exclusive. And I almost think they're trying to say it as like not a knock on Lamar, but like, I mean, what other takeaway could you have? Like if I was, in a position where we're trying to convince him we love him, he's our guy, I'd say, yeah, we're doing the exclusive because I'm not letting anyone sign into an offer sheet because he's not going anywhere. Or if he is going somewhere, we're going to get 10 first-round picks for it. We're not going to get it signed away for 2 first-round picks, which would be the non-exclusive. So I just think they're kind of playing some games with how they address that. Maybe they just don't want to tell us, which is fine too. But no developments there. I mean, the tag deadline is March 7th, which is 5 days from when this is coming out. So very, very soon. I don't know. I'm in the same position. I think he's going to get the exclusive tag, and this thing is going to drag on until that July 15th deadline, which is when franchise tag players can be extended. I don't think we'll have a resolution right up until that date.
Okay. That I mean, it makes sense. I wouldn't expect it to come out before then, to be honest with you. But it will be super interesting to watch. Okay, you are on your way to a great evening. I hope that you have a story as good as this one. So I promised I would tell it last week on Sunday. I forgot. But my first combine ever, which was, I don't remember which year it was, but it must have been around, I can't remember if Jimmy G, was it his first year? I think it was the first year that he had played on the Niners, is my guess. This is important context. So I am out at Prime, and I think this was earlier in the week, and meet the high school or college, whatever it was, quarterback's coach for Jimmy G. I'm forgetting this guy's name. I want to say something Christensen. His son is also a quarterback's coach. And so I, of course, am, Niners fan. I'm excited about Jimmy taking over the world. So we start talking. And we're having a good conversation. And, whatever. So we know each other. And as the week rolls on in Indy, you go back to Prime, each night. It's not like you are only going to see people at one time. So I come back, and the next night we somehow get into this conversation about Tom Brady. And I am like adamant that Tom Brady has improved his throwing motion and his arm strength and all these things over the course of his career. And I don't know if this guy, and I'm blanking on his first name, but I don't know if he had worked with Tom at some point or knew Tom House or whatever, but he was like, no, you're wrong. So he pulls up tape on his phone of like Tom Brady throwing at Michigan. He's got like Jimmy G side by sides. We're like looking at the mechanics. And we are in a knockdown like drag. Like I thought the dude was going to punch me in the face. Like he was so mad that I was incessant. I know nothing about quarterbacking. I am incessant that Tom Brady's arm strength has improved. And so Steve Palazzolo is with me, and he's just kind of looking at me on the side of his like, dude, if you get punched in the face by this guy, like this is going to be incredible, because he knows I'm not going to do anything, to him. I'm just, sitting there having a good time, but I'm kind of egging him on. And so at some point, we get kind of separated, and but he's like, MFing you and I, MF you back and forth, and I'm holding to my guns, so we get pulled away. And now for the rest of the week, every time we cross paths in the JW Marriott, like, the tension, you could cut it with a knife, Brad. So finally, it's the night of the PFF party, and he shows up to the party. And so he realizes that he's either going to start making fun of me, or we're going to have an issue here, or he's going to be nice. So he comes up to me and I'm ready for it. I'm like, all right, we're going to get back into this. I'm going to win this one. He goes, hey man, I'm really sorry. As a make it up gift, I have some film of Jimmy G's like practice sessions from like high school that I want to show you. So no joke, sitting there in the bottom of St. Elmo's watching like clips on this guy's phone of like Jimmy G throwing against air on his phone. But it gets so much better. I think it's over. I think we've buried the hatchet, and we're at Prime the last night, and Christian Hackenberg comes up. And people remember Christian Hackenberg because he's sick. He sucks. He's terrible. He was out of the league, and this guy was working with Hackenberg. And I don't know how we got on the topic, but I was like, okay, you can at least level with me here. We've had our disagreements. Hackenberg sucks, right? And he looks me dead in the eye and he goes, Hackenberg's going to be a top 5 quarterback in 2 years. And out comes the phone again. He's got more clips. And we're looking at Christian Hackenberg throwing that offseason. And I'll never forget it. And this guy's a great guy. And it's not like, I'm not, making fun of him in any way, shape, or form. Hackenberg was unfixable. So he shows me this video, and this is a perfect example of like traits versus production. So he shows me the clip. Hackenberg drops back, makes a throw. Before the throw has gotten halfway to the receiver, he's looking up at me and going, see, I told you so. Look at that motion. The ball sails over the receiver's head by 15 feet, Brad. I mean, this thing wasn't even remotely close. And we got right back into it. So we didn't end up throwing blows. But it's a great example of how the combine is a fantastic place for people who know ball and want to talk about it.
Christian Hackenberg was arguably a top 5 quarterback on his XFL roster last season. So, maybe that's what he meant, and maybe he wasn't wrong in that argument.
It's amazing that we talked about Tom Brady, the GOAT, Jimmy G, the GOAT, and then we closed out on Christian Hackenberg, who you never know. Maybe makes a comeback.
You never know.
I hope that you do not get into a fight, but have an epic evening and rest of your trip. Don't die. You got to stay healthy. It's important. We'll be back on Sunday night and hear about Brad's great stories from the Combine. If you haven't checked out the PFF Printing Press Discord, get in there. The link is in the description, and we will see you wonderful people on Sunday night. Peace.